You're watching the DSP Leaders Summit on the Cloud Native Telco. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content at TelecomTV. Today's discussion is on Cloud Native and the Elusive Telco Cloud. Why elusive? Because the requirements keep changing and the long-held goal appears to still be out of reach. So whether you call it Telco Cloud or Carrier Cloud, how can modern Cloud Native practices help? Well, let me now introduce our guests for the next half hour or so, and I'm delighted to say that we are joined by Mattias Fridstrom, who is Chief Evangelist at Telia Carrier, and Azhar Sayeed, Global Chief Architect at Red Hat. Good to see you both again. Thanks very much for taking part in our discussion today.
Thank you very much for having us.
Now, we've spoken about Telco Cloud or Carrier Cloud for quite some time now. We've discussed how the cloud would host and run a telco's functions and activities. It sounds like it was once going to be a private telco-owned and built cloud, but increasingly we're hearing that telcos are turning to the hyperscalers and the public cloud for help. So if we can set the scene before we really start, and that is, what exactly is the telco cloud today? Mattias, let's start with you. How would you describe the telco cloud?
I would actually say it really, as you said, in the beginning, and I would say, probably 8 years ago, we started here at our company to build our own telco cloud because we really believe that's the only way forward. We are the only one that can build this telco cloud. And then over the years, that came up. I don't think telcos were really geared up to have that type of competence to run a cloud service. And then, some of the other clouds came up and a lot of our people started to think, why not use that cloud? And suddenly we had many clouds in service. I would say the telco cloud today is a combination of a number of clouds out there and our own self-developed cloud. And typically we run a number of services now in the public clouds, in some private clouds, and in our own cloud. So I would say the telco cloud today for a telecom operator is a combination of a lot of them. So I think that's where we are right now.
And Azhar, your experience and expertise, not just in telcos, but Red Hat's been there for the enterprise for so many years now. How do you see the telco cloud?
Actually, let me just step back a little bit, Guy, if you don't mind. In terms of the evolution of telco cloud, what happened was when telcos started to virtualize their network functions and put them on with the advent of NFV conversation, they need a place to host those different network functions as applications and build an IaaS infrastructure. And that's what they initially called it as telco cloud. And that's why your original reference of I need to build this and own this and drive this is where that particular telco cloud conversation came into picture, with these telcos building a private cloud type of an environment. As Mattias mentioned a moment ago, things have evolved since then. Things have evolved because of many reasons. Primarily because some of the control data plane separation components have evolved so much in the last 2 years that we now are beginning to see telcos host a number of control plane components in public cloud environments or use public cloud environments to create a hybrid environment with their private cloud infrastructure. So to me, where previously the telco cloud definition was originally a private cloud environment, now telco cloud definition absolutely includes, as Mattias said, a hybrid cloud environment where there may be some public cloud components and be private cloud components all stitched together to actually deliver that service to the end customers.
So are things changing? Is the attraction of a telco cloud different to telcos to what it once was? I mean, Azhar, you've explained about the need to kind of retain and control this large-scale hosting of network functions. We started talking about NFV, and then add to that services and applications, both internal and external. Is there? I'm trying to get my head around. Is there still an attraction for a telco cloud? Mattias, do you still see this requirement?
Absolutely. No, I still see the requirement for a telco cloud. I still see that there's a number of functionalities that we feel, this would work much better in the cloud than it is working, buying the old way, buying hardware, putting out hardware, upgrading software and all that stuff, I think there's a lot of things that telco is doing today that actually fits the cloud much better. I think the problem we've had, and as we talked about, is, when people feel, we need to bring this into the cloud as well, then people are on their own inviting even more clouds. And I think a telco right now have less of a control of all the clouds because we've put everything into the cloud, and people really feel, yeah, I follow corporate strategies which says that everything should be in the cloud. I think we need to scale everything a bit, take a step back now and look, what type of clouds should we use and what should be in the clouds. But it's for sure the future of telecom operators. There's so many benefits of being in the cloud comparing to the old days when you bought hardware and software and sort of truckloads everywhere in the world. So it's absolutely a major part of a telco going forward.
So, of course, we're talking about the cloud-native telco. So given our definitions of the telco cloud, how does cloud-native fit into the picture? Azhar, how do we add cloud-native methodologies and practices to the telco cloud?
So applications, as we discussed, are evolving. Network functions are evolving, and they are being disaggregated into smaller components so that there is reusability, restartability, and a number of efficiencies that can be gained through disaggregation of that monolith code. That is driving really a conversation in the industry around how you can leverage cloud-native practices to apply to that telco cloud environment. Again, I'll start off from the previous conversation where I said telco cloud is a way of instantiating network applications, network functions, and services in a cloud environment, private or public or hybrid. Now, if you start to disaggregate those network functions that were running in virtual machines and further into microservices so that you have reusability, you have a catalog that you can actually apply and manage and gain more efficiencies through this practice, that's where the cloud native conversation comes into picture. So if you look at any of the public clouds that are operating, if you look at any of the large hyperscalers that are operating the cloud, how do they operate at a very large scale with the level of efficiency that they need? It is because they treat those applications as, microservices. Those applications are built with microservices in mind, and they, manage them according to cloud native principles, which means throw away code, throw away hardware, replication, instantiation in a rapid manner. And there are many different metrics on which you measure whether an application is compliant to a cloud native environment or not. You may have heard about 12-factor method and things like that. But more importantly, it's about creating those principles, creating that operating environment that makes it highly resilient and able to work in any situation and scale dynamically.
And Mattias, how do you see cloud native fitting into the picture here?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good, what he said is a very good point there. And I think, most of the telcos were not really, I think in the beginning, we didn't really think about native cloud. We were so happy when something could be moved into the cloud. And what in practice we were doing was, we took one system and one server that we had in the basement and moved everything on that server into the cloud and suddenly felt, this is great. We have someone else running this. But that's obviously not getting the benefits of the native cloud when everything is developed for it. And I would argue that most telecom operators are lacking in skill here, because the IT departments and the network people we have are not used to this. They are not brought up in this way. So we need to bring in more skilled people trying to help us, what should actually be developed from the cloud from the beginning. And as we already have so much legacy in here, it's actually hard. And I would say, what we have done now is from a couple of years ago, almost taking 5 steps back and said, let's rebuild this system from the scratch, like an inventory system, like a CPQ, a configurator in the middle, and do it the way it should be done to fit the cloud, like a native cloud service with microservices and everything. But that's a big shift for most of us. I think many of us felt, Great, this is now in the cloud. Someone else is taking care of the server. Perfect. I only pay for what I use. Yeah, that took us so far. But native cloud, that's something different, and that's where we need to go. But that's a major change for all of us.
Azhar, have you got recommendations and best practices of how we do this?
Right, Guy. In fact, I was just going to add to Mattias's point, which is, when you refactor, you have to refactor applications and those monolithic images into smaller components to gain truly the benefit of a cloud native environment. Because once you do that, then you start looking at, how can I build a catalog of these microservices? How can I reuse them across different applications and functions so that I'm actually being more efficient? Because and then how can I manage state? An application carries state. And especially if you're able to manage that state much more appropriately, you then can actually create an environment that's highly resilient, that's highly scalable. Because again, let's take an example. In a virtual machine environment, you have an application running inside a virtual machine. That virtual machine has another OS. That virtual machine requires a hypervisor to run on that particular hardware plane. And now every time you need a new network function, you're going to instantiate another virtual machine. And then in that another virtual machine, again, you have the OS layer, again, that works with the hypervisor layer. And you're probably replicating a whole bunch of components all over again that are required by the application, like monitoring, like logging, like tracing capability, and so on. So you're replicating each time again and again and again. That becomes inefficient. If you were to actually rewrite that particular application so that these components are stripped out and separated out into microservices, where you had a database where you could store the information that you'd manage state with, then the rest of the components become stateless, and you can then actually, reuse those components. So then you have a registry, you have a catalog, you have a database, and everybody can use those. So simple example, AMF, SMF, both maintain state, particularly SGW and PGW in the LTE domain, for example, both maintain state for sessions. You don't need to maintain state for sessions twice when you run both of them on the cloud environment. You need to only maintain that once and just do packet forwarding appropriately. So these are the efficiencies that you can get out of the cloud native environment. And it all begins with how well these applications are written and disaggregated to a cloud native environment.
Now, I get the sense that there's a lot of work involved before we realize these benefits. And Mattias, you've already indicated that skills and shortage of skills is an issue here. We've got to know how to do this. So really, whose responsibility is it to architect these functions, to create these microservices that are optimized for cloud hosting? Is it the telco? Is it the vendor partner? Is it a partnership between both?
It's absolutely a partnership between both, but I would actually argue that the telco have a big role here. I would say the 5G network is a really good example here, because that's something that's built from the scratch. But it's built by people who previously built 2G, 3G, 4G. So for them, 5G is just the next step. But in reality, it's very, very different. And you can actually bring in a lot of these cloud native stuff in there. And I know that our company and a lot of companies here are struggling because the people that build the other networks are not used to building in this way. And that's a major development. We have a number of vendors, obviously, so we are taking advantage of using them as well and developing this, but there's a lot of things in here for a telco to learn. Then, of course, we need to bring in experts from the side, like Red Hat, like IBM, like others who have the knowledge of how to run this. But I would say for a telco, it's a major shift. It's going to be built by the same people who's already built the other networks, but in a very different way. And that's a huge thing for a telco to think about. And I would say the skill set here needs to change. People can absolutely develop, but it's a completely different skill set.
So, Azhar, a different way of building networks and new skills required.
Absolutely. I think you need to reinvent yourselves. Otherwise, the over-the-top players hyperscalers will eat your lunch. And this is what I think every telco has realized, that they have to be more efficient, they have to be, better equipped, and they need to start learning. One point that Mattias raises is really important, and I think I need to underscore that a little bit. The point that he raises around they don't have the skill set, but they have to do it. Also, telco needs to drive that conversation with the vendor partners. Ultimately, in network applications or some of the applications that they consume, that they're from and they source from outside through these vendor partners, those applications obviously have to be written in a cloud native manner, but a telco can drive that conversation to a vendor partner saying, you need to build these applications according to my requirements, not necessarily according to what you want to do. And this is a conversation that I've seen that's being very successful in some of the telcos, where telco owns the architecture, they own the concept and the vision, and then they ask these vendor partners to come in and work with them on that particular vision to drive towards a cloud native telco environment, right? If that doesn't happen, and if you're actually sitting there as a telco, just saying what is out there in the market and let me consume what's out there in the market, then you're going to be driven. Even if you build a cloud-like environment, you're still going to be building a vertical stack in a silo.
Now, you both mentioned 5G. You both, and Azhar, I know you mentioned control plane and user plane. We'll get onto that in a second. Matthias, I'm curious about 5G and the impact 5G will have, and whether that's going to change the dynamics of telco cloud, because we've got this CUPS architecture, this separation of control plane and user plane. We've got the need for new 5G cores, which are coming faster than many of us maybe once thought. Will all this cause a bit of a rethink of what we need to do with telco cloud?
I actually think so, yes. First of all, we need to decide, should we have a telco cloud ourselves at all? And I think the answer to that is yes, because I think there are a number of things we would love to have in-house and we would love to have on our own servers. Some things can absolutely be in the public cloud there because it should be closer to where we need to use it. But I think, in some way we have to develop ourselves the skill of, what should be in cloud and where should that cloud be. But I'm absolutely sure there is a need for our own telco cloud still. There's so many functionalities we want to keep inside the fence on our side, and there's no better way of having it in the telco cloud. And I can really see on our side that we are developing the skill set. There are people developing in the company. We are recruiting people from the outside who have this skill set, and we're starting to use our partners in a much smarter way. As we talked about, we need to use them where we need to use them and not just outsource the thinking to them to tell them to come to tell us what to do. I think it's becoming more that we tell them what we want from them and they do what we ask them to do. But I'm absolutely sure there is a part for our own telco cloud in here. I don't think a telco wants to have everything they have in the public cloud somewhere, even though it might be a good option to run it like that.
I want to pick up on that a little bit further towards the end of our conversation. But Azhar, for now, you mentioned earlier about the control plane, and this fascinates me because it seems like the control plane element is something that we could build into the telco cloud, could become a means to further a telco's transformation journey. This is something that could be built up from cloud native first principles. Is this an area that may encourage the acceleration of cloud native within telcos?
So certainly we are seeing in the context of 5G, right? Most of the 5G core that's being delivered by all of the different vendor partners is written to a cloud native environment. And that itself is a big change from where they were on the LTE core. So if you look at that, and to deploy a 5G core, you have to get some sort of a cloud native experience in the picture. And if you look at the services-based architecture that the cloud native, the 5G core is built upon, it's exactly to leverage some of the power of control data plane separation, to create that particular catalog, to manage application functions as part of the 5G core, and to do things like network exposure, network selection, which allow edge compute models to come up into the picture. right, for telcos, for mobile providers. So 5G core is really acting as a key catalyst in terms of driving that telco cloud native conversation in the telco cloud domain. Having said that, the public cloud, where is a public cloud really useful? A public cloud can be really useful in two ways. One, bringing the public cloud ecosystem to consumers of telco cloud in creating that type of hybrid environment so that people developing applications, people developing services can leverage that and deliver those type of services. And two, offloading some of your internal IT and processes or capabilities that you don't require to manage and control within your domain. I mean, again, you don't lose control by putting things in a telco into a public cloud, but the reasons might be that you want, other efficiencies. You want probably common data stores. You want probably things that are non-critical to you that you don't want to keep, explicit control of. For regulatory reasons, you may want to put things in your own cloud versus public cloud and so on. We've actually, working with our customers, developed a criteria in terms of what workloads can stay in your own private cloud environment, what workloads can move to a public cloud environment based on many different reasons. Bandwidth, throughput being the base minimal to regulatory and data sovereignty type of issues that also need to be considered in terms of how you place those workloads.
Mattias, as I mentioned, which workloads can go to the public cloud and also compliance issues and regulation. But what about security? Are there implications for network security by moving towards public cloud for telco cloud hosting?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think security is a much more important topic today than it was before. And I actually think the development of a number of cloud security providers is also a cool thing. Today you can buy your own security in the cloud itself. So, but absolutely, using public clouds everywhere, I would argue that many enterprises and many companies and service providers are a bit afraid of, can I really put this out there and so on. But I would argue that the combination of on-prem security and cloud security is going to be a really good security solution in the future. And I think the scalability with the cloud as well on the secure solution out there in the cloud is going to be really good. So the funny thing, you're actually going to use the cloud to secure your cloud. But I think that's a good thing. A couple of years ago, it was probably, you had a feeling that you sent your traffic to one place to secure the traffic when it's actually was going in another direction. Now I think those security providers are located in so many spots around, so you don't have the feeling anymore that your traffic is going around and around just to be secure. So loads of developments has been done here. I would say the next couple of years, the security cloud solutions is just going to be even better. So I would say security, yeah, that was a wonder. That was something you were really worried about a couple of years ago. But I think today there's so many good solutions out there, even in the cloud. So I don't think that's going to be a problem for enterprises and service providers going forward.
The way I see it is security is as good as your weakest link. So, what the processes that you put in place in terms of a private cloud environment or a public cloud environment need to be robust enough to handle security in both places. And, security by obscurity doesn't work. This is where, open source plays a key role. This is where policies and procedures that you put in place play a key role. And as Mattias was saying, I think we've evolved quite a bit in the last 2 years or 3 years to now trust both the environments in a much better way that we feel comfortable posting, mission-critical applications, hosting mission-critical applications there, and actually providing wide variety of services to the different customers. What we as Red Hat have seen actually in this space is that this has significantly changed. The posture has significantly changed. If we look at our product set, for example, we have, gone through FedRAMP compliance, FISMA compliance and so on, in terms of security compliance for our software. And then additionally, our software goes through a very rigorous audit process. Because it's open source, we use open source. We have many people looking at that particular source code to ensure that there are no issues in the context of the infra layer that we provide, or the platform layer that we provide. And then, of course, over and above that, you still have to secure your applications by applying the right set of rules and policies. And those things are all built into the platform now. So it's certainly evolved a long way.
Mattias, I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier, and that was the key issue of skills. When we looked at Telco Cloud a few years ago, we were looking at building out tens of thousands of new data centers or more. Big business here, stacks of routers, stacks of boxes. There seems to be a move towards more software. So we're moving more software based, more focus on software, which is new skills, I guess. Do you feel that the vision of these big data center based telco cloud is router based, hardware based, has now migrated to software based, and that in turn leads to all the new skill requirements that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would say it really has. And if I just look at the sort of last 20 people we've hired on our side in our company, it all comes with a very different skill sets from the people we had before. We had so many network engineers here who could run so many things on top of routers and servers and everything. But the new people we bring in come in with a very different. They think streaming telemetry is really important. We need to use all the data we have everywhere, and it's a completely new skill set that we brought in. And I think the combination of that with the old people who still knows how the old network and legacy network runs is a perfect match and combination. I think both sides needs to listen to each other, but there's definitely a big shift for telecom operators in terms of the skill set they need. You don't need people anymore who can go out with a screwdriver and jank in some new hardware. We need people sitting in the office texting or doing code simply and using all the data we can get out of the network, because I think telecom operators have been extremely bad in using the data we have. We have loads of data from the networks, and it's only very recently that we started to use all this data. And of course, when everything becomes cloud native, we will have an in-source of data that is just crazy. And the more we can do with that data, the better. So, but absolutely, we need a complete new skill set of people in the people we employ.
As our final question to you, as we discuss the telco cloud and we discuss cloud native, a lot of this has all come together. There's another question that arises, and that is, are we as an industry pushing more out towards the edge? Is this story we're talking about here, is this migrating towards becoming more of an edge story? And is our focus going to be more on edge deployments and applying cloud native to the edge?
I believe the cloud native journey has to happen for a telco. And right now it's beginning with the core. But I think, Guy, as you rightly put it, if you look at their current services deployments and the expansion of the network footprint or the cloud footprint, it's moving definitely towards the edge. Every single telco that I've talked to is interested in lighting up infrastructure at the edge, either on their own or via partnerships, to be able to build a new breed of services. Now, those new breed of services and those new breed of applications generally are cloud native. And so what they're really trying to do is expand that particular cloud footprint that they have, which is in a few data centers right now, maybe a handful, to now, 50, 60, 100, maybe even thousands of locations as they start to look at the RAN as well. So that's where I believe the conversation's moving. That's what is accelerating the considerations, the deployment considerations for a cloud native telco. And certainly the way 5G core has come up, where people are now moving, what were they doing before? They were deploying new radio with an LTE core in the NSA mode, non-standalone mode. Now they're starting to deploy 5G core. That 5G core is cloud native. Now they can actually create this control data plane separation. They can start to place UPF closer to the edge, which means now they can do local traffic offload, which means they can then start to host applications at that particular edge. So it's literally a chain reaction that got set up through the deployment of 5G core that's beginning to start. So it's absolutely, I totally agree with you that the conversation is moving towards the edge, and people are now looking to see how well can they scale this entire environment, and only a cloud native environment can scale to those type of thousands of sites, hundreds of thousands of machines, and maybe millions of microservices.
Mattias, final thoughts from you?
No, I completely agree with Azhar. Both everything in IoT and everything in 5G is going to be much more towards the edge, and the one that can build out to the edge the quickest and don't have all the traffic going back and forth everywhere in the network. That's going to be a huge advantage for a telecom operator. So the edge is absolutely here, and if the edge can be cloud native, and it has to be cloud native, then that's going to help both the IoT solutions and the 5G solutions and everything else. There's still a need for a big data center in the core where you can crunch enormous amounts of data to draw some really cool conclusions. But I would say, the edge is going to be more and more important, and more intelligence is going to be in the edge, and then it needs to be cloud native out there.
Well, that's all the time we have now, unfortunately. But for now, thank you both very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you, Mattias. It was my pleasure.
Well, a reminder that we have many more interviews, panel discussions and analysis programs as part of the Cloud Native Telco Summit, and they are all here to view on TelecomTV. If you're watching us live, then please stay with us and join our live Q&A program. If you have any questions for any of our guests, then do get in touch with us now via the TelecomTV website. But for now, thank you for watching, and we hope to see you again very soon.